The Honourable Brian Walker.
Thank you, President. I move that 1. This House notes the recent vaping education pack issued by the McGowan government and supports regulation to prevent vape stores from operating within a predetermined radius of schools. 2. Further, the Legislative Council encourages the government to investigate the potential to regulate such distance-based solution, alongside an investigation into the level and scope of regulation necessary to allow small vape businesses to continue to provide a valuable economic and social service to the community, while protecting the vulnerable, the results to be presented to Parliament upon completion.
Members, the Honourable Brian Walker has moved that motion, and the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Brian Walker.
Thank you, President. Now, you are probably going to be very surprised that a medical doctor is actually speaking in favour of this motion. I am, and everyone knows, I am a rabid anti-smoker. You see, smoking killed my parents. From the age of 5, I remember vividly arguing with my parents to stop their habit. It was foul, it was smelly, it was dirty, and I detested it from the age of 5. They had come through a war. Those who were non-smokers were the abnormal ones. Everyone smoked, almost everyone. So I learned how difficult it was to stop smoking, not just when it became unfashionable, but the very difficulty of actually stopping a habit which is highly addictive. So I had to watch my parents die. My father at 50, my mother at 80, but she could have lived to 95. And so the loss of life years, the loss of quality of life will be on my memory until the day I die. And it even affected my little brother, who, despite growing with parents who smoked quite heavily, took up the habit as well, and has, of course, since died. My little brother is dead partly because of smoking. But as a doctor, I know there's a wealth of evidence to support the use of prescriptions to help people stopping smoking. I do this all the time. There's pills, there's potions, there's patches, there's sprays, and I always accompany that when I'm prescribing to patients by saying, these don't really work. They have an effect, they may be helpful for some, but most often people return to smoking after they have tried. It's a failure. So the best way to quit is actually to want to quit smoking. I mean, really want to quit. But the evidence is also clear, and this is increasingly the case, we have evidence for that, that it's like the sun, the dawn sun is rising, we have evidence that vaping helps people to stop smoking. And so this can be an effective support to those who wish to stop smoking. But as a doctor, I also know it's important, it's imperative, that patients have ownership of their own problems. You see, it's all very well me pontificating and saying this is what you should do to be healthy. If I'm saying you've got to avoid eating, say, potatoes, and they've grown up on potatoes, it's a big ask. So they've got to have ownership of what's going on. I am in charge of my health, my doctor is my advisor, but I decide. I'm in charge. So it's important that you have the ownership of your treatment. Otherwise, things just don't happen. We know from science that only 30% of what doctors prescribe gets done by the patient. 30%. Maybe they don't trust doctors, which I highly recommend you don't trust doctors, just the same as we shouldn't really trust politicians either, but there we are. Whatever the reason, people opt to go their own path and they go it alone. Now, to help them with smoking, there are some 25 specialist vape stores across our state. That's not counting the other commercial sources, the IGAs, the convenience stores that stock vape supplies. Now, so I've only been to a few. I can't speak for all of these diverse outlets, but in recent months, I have spoken with a number of specialist stores and owners and people who are concerned with vaping. And I can tell you that they are worried for their future on a couple of fronts, two major fronts. The first, of course, is purely from business. My business is going to go down the tubes. I'm going to have no income. I have to close my store. That's a valid... Vape stores. Yes, vape
Even
stores.
though it's actually illegal to sell. Like, are these like Cloud9 sort of outfits?
Sort of like that, yes. Yeah.
So they're going to go out of business because they're illegal?
Well, they're illegal because they're selling... now this is the point we're making here. They've now had their reason for business has gone. Now, the other one, of course...
Order. This is actually a debate, not a cross-chamber chatter, so the Honourable Brian Walker has the call.
I thank the Minister for pointing out these discrepancies, because this is part of the problem, is being unclear. Their stores are still open. They're selling vape products which contain no nicotine, of course, but they are flavoured products, and they then can assist people to modify their prescribed nicotine solution with the vape to encourage them to reduce their cigarette consumption. Well, this is exactly the point, because what's happening, attractive to young people, because they are following what adults do and they're exploring things. And so keeping this out of children will be very much in the public interest. And this is an aim shared by those vape stores. It's very much a point of view which is shared by those professionals who want to serve the public. What they're also worried about, the second thing, is that big tobacco is just sitting on the sidelines, waiting to step into the vacuum. Now, we know when we try and prohibit things, we're opening up the debate to people who are going to be less interested in wellness and more interested in personal profits at the expense of people's health. And as said, I'm a rabid anti-smoker. I have seen people die with this. I've actually been by their bedside as they have passed away from the effects of smoking. It is not a pleasant sight. And then to see the families who say, if only they had stopped, we tried and we tried. Well, that's part of my interest. It's twofold. Partly as a quirk of geography. I've got a number of vape stores in my electorate, and I want to represent their interests, as indeed should any member of Parliament. But also, to be blunt, there are many constituents who are on a philosophical belief, share my belief, that people ought to be empowered to do what they think is right for themselves. And we should be doing all that we can to allow people to do what is right, provided no harm is caused to others. It's one of my fundamental beliefs. So let's be clear. The 25 vape stores that I have mentioned, they're not selling nicotine. Because if they were, they'd be breaking the law. And the government would have already closed them down. I can prescribe nicotine. But the process for me to prescribe nicotine is actually really complex. It's even more complicated, I think, than prescribing cannabis. And so what happens then, people find it much easier not to pay for a doctor, wait the 15 or 45 or 55 minutes to see a doctor, get a prescription to go to the chemist, to have it ordered in to then mix with their vape. They don't do that. They just walk into the shop and buy some cigarettes. So we're making it more difficult for people to actually come off cigarettes, because by well-meaning legislation, we're actually making it harder for people to stop. They are selling two things. One is vape devices, which they sell separate, so they don't breach the provisions of the Tobacco Products Control Act, which is ironic, given that there is no tobacco in the product. And they're actually going to cut back on tobacco use. So it's actually quite an ironic issue that they can't sell these things together, because of the Tobacco Products Control Act. And they also sell non-nicotine, often flavoured vape juices. Now, these stores have largely been self-regulated. I spoke just the other day with an owner who was highly supportive of course he is, of vaping, because it stopped him from smoking. He had tried everything that doctors could prescribe. He tried his own efforts, and the only way he could get off cigarettes was by actually vaping, and he did it very successfully. And he gets people coming into his store on a regular basis thanking him because their quality of life has improved. They're feeling better, their taste is better, they're actually living better because of the service he offers, helping people to come off that odious habit. But self-regulated also means that they are protecting the children. Under 18s aren't allowed. They're not within any near proximity to a school, or they shouldn't be. And in some cases even, when they find adults coming in there to buy vape products to give to children, they're being weeded out, if at all possible, so that we can try and reduce the risk, as Honourable Stephen Pratt mentioned, of allowing children to get into this habit as well. But is everyone doing the right thing? I think not. I've heard of some stores, maybe convenience stores, who take a rather relaxed attitude, much like the tobacco shops, which may sell to a young person tobacco. Okay, they never notice that. They allow them to come in, or friends buy tobacco for their young friends. This happens all the time. We have a problem with this. We need to find a better way of dealing with this habit of smoking in our community. All of us agree with that. And the question is, how are we going to implement that to everyone's benefit? So these specialist stores, they don't want to see underage kids hooked on a new fad. They also don't want to inadvertently become a gateway to smoking. They are in a place to oppose that, and they do oppose it, root and branch. It is opposed by the people who are in control of the vape shops. We need to be supporting that. And that's why they have urged me, and I now urge the government, in the first limb of my motion today, to regulate a distance within which vape stores cannot operate in terms of nearby schools. I've already seen one case of a store in my own electorate closed down because it was too close to a school. That was a blow for the family-operated store, but they accepted the decision. It was the right decision. If we had regulation in place already, it would likely never have come to that, as new vendors would know where they could and could not set up shop, much as we have with alcohol. Now, the second limb of my motion calls for broader regulation, and for the government to establish exactly what is needed in regard to that safeguard and to safeguard the vulnerable, while still allowing a valuable service to be provided by these family-owned stores and operated stores. This is something only a government can undertake, if only because there's so much data to be considered in this space. Now, I spent a good portion of my weekend, that portion which wasn't spent preparing for yesterday's Emergency Management Amendment Bill, working my way through one particularly impressive piece of research, which I would commend to the government. So it's called Nicotine Vaping in England 2022, and is arguably the single most exhaustive piece of government research on vaping that I've ever read. It's commissioned by the Office of Health Improvement in the UK. It's got 1,400 pages and goes into extensive detail on vaping among young people in England, vaping among adults, the use of nicotine and the flavourings used in many of the juices. It's a balanced piece of research. As you would expect from a government, it also looks in great detail at science as it relates to cancers, respiratory disease, cardiovascular disease and other potential health outcomes. Now, I'm going to give a spoiler. 1,400 pages. I know you're not going to read it. I'll share its key conclusion, though. I really do recommend, if you're interested, to read the report for yourselves, if only to see what can be achieved when a major government department finally agrees to think outside the box. Vaping is good. I'll come to that in a moment. Okay. So I'll seek leave to table the report later. Okay. I've got a PDF that you can scan as well. But the key findings, and I will have to quote verbatim in each instance. Vaping, it says, poses only a small fraction of the risk of smoking and is at least 95% less harmful than smoking. That is, smoking is at least 20 times more harmful to users than vaping. Next. Evidence from stop smoking services show that vaping is effective for stopping smoking. Effective. These findings, along with our findings that vaping carries a small fraction of the health risks of smoking, suggest that smokers should be encouraged to use vaping products. This is a government report in the UK. It's mirrored actually in other nations of the world. Cuts to government bodies, that's in England, responsible for overseeing vaping products are concerning. The recent increase in young people using disposable vaping products makes this an even greater concern because, if it continues, it could undermine the approach and regulatory framework for vaping products. I'll come back to that idea in a moment. And as overarching findings, this is what the report says, as well as educational materials aimed at older smokers on why and how to vape to stop smoking, educational materials are also needed for young people starting vaping who would not otherwise have smoked, and for those who need support in stopping smoking. Now, I don't know about you, the members in this chamber, but these findings and recommendations, they resonate with me in terms of our current situation here in WA. I desperately want to help people stop smoking. And we want to protect our most vulnerable from picking up the habit, which will have health implications of its own. Now, we can acknowledge that vaping can have a valuable role to play in reducing tobacco harm in our community. But we know also instinctively that for it to do the most good, vaping needs a suitable level of regulation which in our case we have yet to draft. What that lack of regulation has done, in effect, is force the estimated 522,000 vapers in Australia, and I want to stress, this is a national issue. It's not just a state issue, it's a national issue. And WA is not alone in having left it unregulated for too long. What that lack of regulation does is leave us small, responsible local businesses in a weird legal limbo, while at the same time encouraging vapers to go online and buy wholly unregulated products from overseas. Now, just the other week, I saw an anti-vaping paper which suggested that one of the risks of vaping was that vape devices could explode, causing serious burns to users. President, I'm not a mechanic, but I would suggest a legally sold vape tailored to the needs of the user, the function of which is explained by a properly regulated vendor, is a lot less likely to malfunction than a cheap knockoff bought over the internet, built in sweatshops to the lowest common denominator in the name of a fast sale. That's not the sort of model that I'm supporting here today, and I don't believe it's the sort of model the industry is advocating either. So personally, I would like to see exempt nicotine e-liquids lower than 5% in concentration for vaping from the poison standard. Introduce laws and guidelines specifying minimum standards for the manufacture and safety of vaping liquids. Introduce mandatory standards for labelling, refill containers and health warnings. Prohibit descriptive flavour names that specifically appeal to youth and unsafe flavouring chemicals. And, of course, regulate the sale of nicotine e-liquids in vape shops, other retail outlets and online. Now, some of these will require a national approach. Others can be researched and implemented at a state level, and there's nothing stopping Western Australia from leading the way in that regard. And please note, the things I said I would personally like to see, they're not set out in this motion. Indeed, what I am asking for is the government to take the time and make the commitment to undertaking its own comprehensive review with the aim to bringing forward a regulatory model that it approves of, and one which will bring some much needed balance to the industry as well as to public health in this sphere. Now, research shows we have plateaued here in Australia with our reduction in smoking numbers at about 0.3% per annum, which is negligible. And that's compared to countries like the UK and US, where vaping has been embraced as a quit aid. The US has seen a consistent 1% drop per annum since 2013. Now, in case that appears to be a somewhat abstract difference, 1% in the US and 0.2% here, if we concede that vaping has approximately 5% of the long-term risk of smoking, okay, 104,000 Australian lives would be saved by 2080. And over 2 million years of lost life would be prevented if Australian regulations mirrored those in the US. With roughly 10% of our national population resident here in Western Australia, that's 10,400 lives over the next 50 years, or more than 200 fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, neighbours and friends saved each and every year from death as a result of smoking. I came into this Parliament with a view to presenting medical information which would allow the people of Western Australia to enjoy better wellness, better life, better quality of life. This is one thing which would assist with that, while at the same time taking care to save our vulnerable in the population. We need to do this because if we don't do this, they will find their way around these regulations to import from overseas those things which will cause them definite harm. This is unacceptable. I'm an optimist, and I've got to assume that we all want the best for health and the well-being of the citizens who elected us into this place. So the science is clear. There's a net good. A lack of regulation will only serve to encourage big tobacco. I am an enemy of big tobacco. This is why we need to regulate at the local level. Absolutely. We need to take us out of the hands of big tobacco and into the hands of the medical available nicotine vapes to allow people to stop smoking, regulated and safe.
It's less bad. You're saying it's good, but what the report says is it's less bad. Doesn't mean we should allow it.
Well, I agree entirely. You've made a very valid point there, and I do accept that. Less bad. The question is, will we allow people to accept the more bad, or do we want to have the less bad available?
Well,
it's an option.
It's also a new thing, so there's no long-term data.
And I do hope that our government will take that on board and allow us to investigate ourselves and see what the facts are from our point of view to get the science and the facts out, because I share entirely your point of view. We need to have the best outcome. The best outcome. And by the current process we've got just now, will not allow the best outcome to happen. So, I seek leave to table that English Department of Health's vaping analysis from September.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
Thank you, President. And with thanks to you all for your indulgence and bearing in mind that the concerns that you have, I also share. But I'm looking for the well-being of the citizens that we represent. I commend this motion heartily to the government.
The question is the motion be agreed. The Minister for Regional Development.
Thank you. President. Now, look, I do appreciate the member bringing forward this motion and also advising us of this new research, which I am sure that we will be very interested to see. I am a little concerned that I think the member may think that there's certain things that are legal in Western Australia that aren't legal, and so I think it's important that we step through the situation. Now, the fundamental in Australia, I think we have made an extraordinary achievement in the reduction of smoking. That it is noticeable whenever one travels around the world that we smoke far less here than we see in any other countries, and that has come not from banning smoking, but obviously putting in financial and social barriers, as well as educating the population on the very real dangers of nicotine. So we know that without making a product illegal, we nevertheless can have a significant impact on behaviour. Now, there's the concern around vaping, I think, and there is evidence, although it's perhaps, and that's, I'll be very interested to look at that research, because it is contested to some extent the degree to which vaping does help a person move away from tobacco smoking and move to less harmful consumption of nicotine. But certainly I have to say that I have met many people who have been lifelong smokers who certainly say that that has helped them. And in recognition of that, we here in Western Australia, and I believe probably across Australia, we allow people access to vaping, provided that they receive a prescription from their doctor. I don't suppose they're probably terribly hard to obtain, and they are then able to get access to vaping, to the vaping devices and to the content that goes into those vaping devices. But the view has been that we don't want to make these just generally available to people that are not already smoking, because this will just create a new class of people that will potentially become addicted to nicotine. And we know from, and there's been work that has been done in Western Australia recently, where we've gone through and tested the substances that was using. So already we can see in school kids, a survey conducted in 2017, we now see 14% of students between 12 and 17 have tried vaping, and so and that. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the additional research that shows the percentage of these products that are actually containing nicotine. Yes, so if we look at, and our Department of Health here in April 2022 started really seizing vapes that contained nicotine, and they collected more than $500,000 worth. They asked the Chem Centre to analyse the vapes found for sale in WA. Disturbingly, they found that 2/3 of the vapes tested contain nicotine despite being labelled as nicotine products. That was a deeply disturbing fact, that 2/3 of the products that were labelled nicotine-free actually had nicotine on them. And, you know, this confirms something that we have been fearful about with vaping, that vaping products are being imported into WA as a nicotine pathway, and that we are seeing young people arguably being deceived because they think they're buying devices that say nicotine-free, and they're finding themselves being hooked by the international purveyors of nicotine. Now, our response has been to say, in a general sense, that you just simply cannot sell vaping devices. You cannot sell any components of vaping devices. And there has been, and so when I listen to when I listen to the comments by the member, he seems to be of the view that all of these vaping stores that are out there are operating legally. Well, I mean, remember, you just have to get to the point. If they based their business on selling a product that it is illegal to sell in Western Australia, and it's not legal in Western Australia, but... Sorry? Well, that is not the advice that we are being given. That any associated product is, and you know, this is not my area of responsibility, so I'm relying on notes. But I understood that there was a case in 2016 where it was set out that indeed all of those components were caught up in this legislation, and certainly at this point in time, the operating instructions of the Department of Health, I don't know if anyone's got any additional information here, is indeed illegal.
Minister, sorry to interrupt. If that's the case, then how are these businesses still operating today? Is there a number of vape stores that
there's a number of weird things that go on you know, you look at Cloud9 stores and you wonder how they are able to continue to operate. Yeah, that's right. A vape device in multiple components is still illegal, again, unless you've got a prescription. So I think as I understand this, that there has been, since April 2022, the Department of Health has really been out there trying to educate people that have been selling that. So in April 2022, they sent correspondence to 3,000 retailers clarifying the restrictions in relation to the sale of e-cigarettes products and nicotine vaping products. Now, that letter said that products that resemble tobacco products, including e-cigarette devices and their components, whether they contain nicotine or not, cannot be sold by tobacco or general retailers. The letter stated that advertising and promotion of these products was not permitted in WA. Now, since that time, so there was a general April 2022 a warning that this is the law, this was how the law was being interpreted. And since that time, over the subsequent 6 months, the Department of Health have been conducting intensive targeted raids on businesses selling illegal vapes. And as I said earlier, in that short space of time, they seized more than 15,000 vapes, which of themselves are illegal. But what was truly worrying is that these vapes all contained nicotine, and that when they were analysed, that notwithstanding their status as their claim to be nicotine-free, they were all contained nicotine. And in fact, there were some e-cigarettes that contained as much nicotine as 50 cigarettes. Also, the Chem Centre report found that they contained other harmful substances such as disinfectants, pesticides, heavy metals. So there's no doubt that these vapes are dangerous. Now, we are rolling out an education plan, and I think in the first part of the motion, the Honourable Brian Walker supported that well-targeted education package that is being promoted. So, remember, the idea that we should regulate to prohibit the selling of vapes within 50 metres of school is a bit nonsensical, given that if you're not a pharmacist, you are not entitled to sell these at all, and you are breaking the law in selling these vaping products, components of vaping products, or the materials, the liquids that go into vaping materials. So it seems to be, in my view, there seems to be some confusion here. We believe that the law, supported by interpretations and that have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, that the law has the law is to be interpreted in this way, that it covers the vapes, it covers the components of the vape, and it covers the inputs. And as we say, what we are seeing, and it is true that probably a lot of these people have been doing this. A big awareness campaign started amongst tobacco retailers and general retailers to let them know that this was not legal, and now further action has been taken. Now, I'll be very interested to have a look at the document that the member referred to. I don't think it will produce any inconsistent result here. What we are recognising, even though there's some variable evidence about it, I certainly think there's enough evidence to support us allowing people that are smokers to receive approval to acquire vapes with various properly graded products. So we don't have any plans to discontinue that, but we are very concerned that we could see, after all of this hard work that has been done to really reduce smoking and really reduce smoking in young people, that this can come in by the back door. And those figures I gave you about the 15,000 supposedly nicotine-free products that are being sold to our young people shows you that, these are the people flogging these things aren't Mother Teresa. So, remember, we don't. We will certainly. We agree that there certainly is a role for vaping in terms of getting people off the habit, but that does need to be done in a controlled way. We haven't outlawed, we're not criminalising the vaping, but we certainly are saying it is illegal, and you must, I think, be very conscientious and ensure that the people you're dealing with understand that the selling of these products is illegal, and that the Department of Health is taking, over the last 6 months, has been taking much more strenuous efforts to ensure that illegal conduct is not continuing. But thank you for your motion.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Sophia Mormont.
Thank you, President. I stand to contribute to today's motion in regards to vaping, brought on by my colleague, Honourable Brian Walker, today. To clarify, I don't understand the attraction of vaping, but I can see the benefits of regulation, specifically for safeguarding of children. Prohibition doesn't work. Just like Minister McTiernan, I too have heard about the incorrect labelling and share her concerns around that. I've also heard that nicotine juice is imported in, and then people blend their own mix to put that in their vape. If you don't understand how to do this correctly, you may find that you have way too much nicotine in there, which can lead to poisoning. Once again, I feel that regulation could help prevent that. And just like my colleague here, the Honourable Brian Walker, I too have lost a parent to smoking. My dad passed away from lung cancer in 2018. He tried many times to give up. And I do wonder if things would have been different if there were more tools available for my father, if he had been able to give up smoking much earlier in his life. I know my health has been affected by second-hand smoke from my parents, with poor lung function and eczema being a real-life result for me. And as our party has made clear before, we are supporters of vaping wholesalers and retail vape shops that operate within the law. We also support the government in their efforts to keep harmful products out of the hands of children and young people. We don't want to see vape stores near schools. We don't want people under 18 to have access to vape stores and things.
So how can they be within 50 metres or whatever of a school, because they're actually illegal?
Well, they've obviously managed to get a business licence and they've set it up, and they sell all the components separately, which...
But I think I just a word of advice. I mean, you're dealing with these businesses. I really think it's important to let them know that the position is that what they are doing is actually illegal. So, I mean, we wouldn't put a law in, you've got to be 50 metres away from a school for a thing that we're saying is illegal, because it would be sort of like sending a very confusing message.
Now, having spoken to several of those business owners, they seem quite passionate about the fact that what they're doing is legal, and that part of what they're doing is taking on the role of safeguarding. So they sell all the different components separately. They also make sure that the products that they sell are labelled correctly, that they don't have the nicotine in there. So, and this is entirely different when you're looking at the black market operations, where cheap items, mostly from China, are being imported with different levels of nicotine on there that don't say there's nicotine on there, but sometimes the levels are quite high around that.
But all that needs to do is get a prescription. So why wouldn't the vape store become someone who can provide that?
Because they don't sell nicotine.
But remember, do you recognise that as the law currently stands, it is illegal to sell?
That's not how I understand it, because the items are being sold differently. Bless you. Okay. So the shops, as I stated, do not want to be part of illegal activity, and it's in the best interest of these stores, obviously, to operate legally, and most of them do. It's the black market that causes the issues, that is advertising on social media and Telegram in particular, advertising what vapes they have and selling them to children in parks, out of their boots of their car. That's what needs to be stopped. That's where the risk for children is. Those vapes, like I said, often do contain nicotine, sometimes at very high doses. So I have visited the vaping stores in my electorate, in Busselton and Bunbury, as well in Perth. These small legal businesses that in some cases have put their life savings into creating a future for themselves and their family in the vaping sector, whether you like it or not, are scared that at any moment they could see the goalposts moved on them and they will lose everything. The government has provided us with some hysteria and false information and dubious scientific facts around those in opposition to vaping. Meanwhile,
Department of Health has been misleading information around vaping.
Yes.
I would be very careful to accuse the department of that.
okay,
That's crazy.
I'm not quite sure how crazy that is. Currently, the government still believes that cannabis causes all sorts of issues as well, when we have clear science showing that that's not actually the case. So,
They used to say smoking was safe too. Didn't they?
yeah, and doctors were involved in that one as well as big tobacco.
And big
Currently,
tobacco
the facts
involved
show
in vaping?
that vaping is, when done properly, is actually safer than smoking cigarettes. They probably are. They probably
right.
see big pharma is investing in cannabis too. Currently, we know that overseas in the UK and New Zealand, vaping is being used very effectively to help people stop smoking. So one of the things that you find with people who smoke is that the rolling of the cigarette, or just the ritual around having a cigarette, is missed by people when they stop smoking. Having a vape will allow them to change that behaviour to something that is much less harmful. So far, what we've heard, certainly with the research, is that non-nicotine vaping products has been proven to save lives. It stops people from smoking, which is, by the way, around 20 times more harmful than vaping. So why not focus on that instead of making it harder for small businesses to operate in what is already a difficult environment? If we spent less time demonising those who vape and vaping stores and more time on real health issues that are killing people every day, we might have some chance of making an impact. Sugar and alcohol are still two items that are causing a lot of health issues in our society. So we also have other behavioural issues currently affecting children that is leading to mostly very unhappy children, which is why we've got several committees working on that at the moment. The young people should absolutely be discouraged from smoking or vaping. We all agree on that. But let's not make out that vaping is the scourge of society that the hype will have you believe. I support any measures that help protect young people from developing bad habits, from taking up harmful activities. But if people want to vape and they are of legal age to do so, they should be allowed to. That is what bodily autonomy is all about.
That stops kids from having vape.
But that is for
Order,
nicotine
order.
vapes specifically, not for other substances. So this motion calls for an investigation by the Minister for Small Business into the scope and level of regulation that is required in this area, so as we can really examine the way to allow small vape businesses to continue to operate and to continue to provide the valuable social service to the community that they do. I fully support this motion before the House today and would look forward to reading the results of any such investigation. Thank you.
The Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, President. President, I was engaged with a little bit of back and forth with the Minister for Regional Development before, and I would have welcomed interjections to clarify some of the legalities around these vape products. So my understanding was, until very recently, selling the individual vape components was considered legal, and therefore we do have legitimate businesses that have been set up as a result. But however, recently, the state government has taken a very liberal interpretation of the Federal Tobacco Act, and there is a Supreme Court case sort of pending. So these are legitimate stores are sort of operating. They're originally operating on the pretext that they can sell legally these individual components. However, now there is sort of a grey area, and therefore we haven't seen that enforcement. But it is a heavy-handed approach by the state government to stamp out what was considered legitimate businesses until very recently. And the state government is taking it as looking. The state government is interpreting the federal act.
Yeah, well,
yes, and it's a grey area, and hence some of the confusion, and certainly some of the confusion for these vaping stores. And it was with those comments.
Remember, like, there wasn't heavy-handed, didn't come in with jackboots. They wrote out to all of these stores and actually set
I'm
out.
sure the consultation process wasn't heavy-handed. The interpretation of the federal act is, in my opinion, heavy-handed. And it's with those comments that I do support the motion raised by the Honourable Dr. Walker. I think regulation in this space is a good idea in preventing children from accessing these vape products.
But it's not legal to do it, so what would the law look like? You know, because we're saying
Well, we're
it's
talking about
illegal to sell
regulation.
these devices, and it's also illegal to sell them within 50 metres of a school. It's already illegal to sell them in 50 metres of a school because it's illegal to sell them generally. I don't get how
Based on the federal acts, Minister, it is legal to sell these products. The state government has taken a colourful interpretation of that act, and it is pending. So once the dust settles, it could potentially be legal to sell these individual components.
Is there a legal action being taken contesting that interpretation?
Look, I believe so.
Well,
I'm not too sure, and I don't want to mislead the chamber on that.
Right.
But I know the state government is taking a very colourful approach to their interpretation of the Federal Tobacco Act. Now, I think we're all on the same page that vaping for children is a bad thing. Vaping stores have come out and said the same thing. I did meet with Legalise Vaping Australia, and that is not an endorsement of them. I know they are partly owned by Big Tobacco, but as an individual member, I do have to meet with a lot of different people and talk on a lot of different issues. And everyone's singing from the same songbook around access to vaping products for children is a bad thing. However, these stores, prior to the interpretation of the state government around the Act and when they were considered legitimate businesses, have been trying to engage in a dialogue with the state government and haven't been successful. And the store owners and advocates for vaping as a smoking cessation aid have been calling on the government to take a harm reduction approach for years, predicting that the continued prohibition would lead to a flourishing black market. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
Alternative, why don't they go to the doctor and...
Well, I think the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker mentioned that it is incredibly hard to get a prescription for these vaping products. So there is a desire in the community for them, and to go down the road of prohibition and to take a heavy-handed approach isn't going to stamp out that desire in the community.
With respect, I mean, you go and
prohibition for the non-vaping product, the non-tobacco vaping products. There's another cohort of people out there that don't want it just for the I guess as a gateway to move off from cigarettes. There's a lot of people that
want to start vaping when they didn't smoke cigarettes before.
Absolutely.
No, I think...
Okay.
Can I just interrupt this lovely little exchange to restore some semblance of a parliamentary debate where there's only one person on their feet, therefore only one voice is heard, and that is the voice of the Honourable Wilson Darko.
Thank you, Acting President. So look, the government has taken notice on this harm reduction approach. So in June, there was a new campaign aimed at preventing school-aged children from taking up vaping, which I've mentioned is a good thing, and I think everyone here would agree. The government has had ample opportunity to get ahead of this issue. So vaping stores, vaping advocacy groups were saying for years that a harm reduction approach is better than the prohibition approach. And they had an opportunity to get ahead of this, being proactive with regulations around vendors, ensuring a basic standard of liquids, which the Minister for Regional Development did touch on, and regulating the sale of products, sale packaging, etc. Instead, the government has spent the last few years treating vaping as an extension of the tobacco industry, which it is clearly not. Acting President, the genie is certainly out of the bottle on this one. I don't think there are many successful, if any, examples of prohibition currently around the world. And meanwhile, vaping does fulfil a need in this community. There were previously legitimate business set up to fulfil a need in the community. That need isn't going away. What the government is doing is forcing a thriving black market. I'm not sure if members have actually tried to...
Actual vaping itself is not illegal, so no one stop it. So we haven't got a situation where people that are vaping are breaking the law.
No, the black market I'm referring to is buying the tobacco vapes at convenience stores. I don't know if members have tried, but going to basically any convenience store and asking for a nicotine vape is a very easy process. So when it comes to illicit drug use, the best practice, in my opinion, is a policy of harm reduction. Unfortunately, when it comes to nicotine, the government is stuck in their thinking in the last century. They haven't taken a proactive approach. Instead of seeing this blunt force approach, shutting down and demonising legitimate businesses. It hasn't worked in the past, and I don't think it'll work now.
The question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable James Hayward.
Thank you very much, Acting President. I congratulate the Honourable Brian Walker for bringing this motion, and whilst I tend to agree with the Minister for Regional Development that a ban around schools is probably not the best way to tackle it, I certainly support the member's motion in terms of the state needs to do more and a lot more. Some of the things that the state is not doing, and I will openly accuse the Department of Health of not moving and not being motivated to responding to the needs, because I'm aware of a particular incident that took months and months and months of reporting before the Department of Health did anything in Bunbury. We have a fast food store that operates on Victoria Street. I'm not going to name the store, but it operates, and for many, many months, it was selling illegal vapes to children, to school children. After school, kids would come down from Bunbury Senior High School. In fact, I speak with a little bit of authority in this space because I have a 16-year-old son, and who lives in Australia. And kids would come from all over Greater Bunbury to attend this store. Everybody knew that that's where they could buy their illegal vapes from. And of course, those illegal vapes do contain nicotine. And I would simply describe the amount of young people using vapes. I noted that the Minister referred to 14% of young people who tried vapes in 2017. I suspect today that is significantly higher. I think that we are in the midst of a vaping crisis amongst young people, and it's something that the government does need to turn its hand to, and I congratulate the efforts it's making in terms of education, but it needs to do more in terms of getting out there and responding to reports where they are aware that stores and individuals are selling vapes to children. Now, this a neighbour of the shop reported to police initially and said, "Look, what's going on here, guys? The fella over the road here, every day after school there are children coming out here with vapes. They open the boxes and throw them in the rubbish. I'm picking them up all the time. You know, what can be done?" The police said, "Well, really, it's an issue because it's a sales issue. It's an issue for the Department of Health. It's not really an issue that the police want to buy into." So he reported it to the Department of Health. I understand he reported it through to the Department of Health around 4 or 5 times over about a 3 to 4 month period. Finally, he went to his local Member of Parliament, the Honourable Don Punch, and spoke to him about the dramas that were going on with this particular store. And finally, the Department of Health moved and turned up and did something. So, Minister, I think there is more the Department of Health do. It does need to be a little bit more responsive in terms of those types of things, and I think it is absolutely critical that we get involved in taking these things out of children's hands. They have a real demand for them. I know that schools are struggling with dealing with the amount of vaping that kids are doing in toilet blocks and around the school. They're putting in all sorts of rules where any kid in a toilet block caught in there while somebody else is vaping, everybody's in trouble, and some of these things are a little bit impractical and potentially a little bit unfair. But those schools are struggling with being able to manage this. And I know that schools are calling the police when they find vapes from time to time, and that has sometimes that works well and other times it doesn't. And it must be a tremendous workload as well on our busy police for things that obviously may not be the highest priority for them normally. So schools are struggling with it, and they need some help. So I think the Department of Health needs to get themselves a bit of a strike force, a bit of a stronger presence in terms of responding to these initial inquiries, particularly when those reports that are coming into the Department of Health involve the specific information that school children are being sold these vapes. And we're talking about significant amounts of money. I mean, I did hear a figure that this particular store was selling around $18,000 a week. That is an incredible amount of transactions. Now, I have got no way of knowing whether that's true or not, but it does seem to be a phenomenal amount of money being turned over. It may be that that particular store owner was not the person who was selling the goods as well. It's possible that it may have been a staff member being sold out of the back of one of the back rooms or whatever, and I don't make any conclusion around that other than it was reported to the Department of Health multiple times and it took them a long time to get organised to do something about it. I have also since heard that the store continues to sell those products to children, but I was unable to speak to my contact this morning to find out where that was at as of today. I read a book that was quite interesting. It's called Hidden Persuaders. It was written in the late 50s recently, and it was about advertising and the techniques that they were using, particularly to sell tobacco, cigarettes, and other items. And it talked about some of these things that have already been mentioned, the ritual nature of smoking. It talked about the desire and of people having something in their hands and their fingers, and even the movement and the activity of putting these things up to your mouth. And you might find this quite outrageous, and I thought it was a bit weird as well. But they even talked about the fact that in some ways smoking mimics breastfeeding from children, brings back these ideas of this activity. The only reason I share this is because what the book was basically talking out in terms of how they were marketing. They knew that this stuff was highly, highly addictive. They knew that the activities around it, the ritual side of it, they know that it's highly addictive. And they were looking to ways to exploit that in the late 1950s and obviously through the 60s and beyond. And they were looking at how they could best make some money out of that for big tobacco. And I only raise that to say that, look, it's a significant thing. It's a powerful influence over young people. Our kids are in the midst of a crisis, and we should do all we can to help them get out of it. Thank you.
The Honourable Martin Pritchard.
Thank you, Acting President. I can't believe what I'm hearing today, to be honest. Through you, Acting President, I have a lot of admiration for the mover of this motion, a lot of admiration. But being a medical practitioner, bringing this sort of motion moves me to speak in opposition. I will not be supporting this motion. I grew up, like some of you, in an era where it was cool to smoke. So I went to Hampton Senior High School, and there was a delicatessen on the way to Hampton Senior High School. So at the age of about 13, I thought it was cool to smoke, so I'd stop off at this delicatessen, and even though it was illegal to sell it to under 18 or under 16, they'd sell you a packet of 5 cigarettes at that time, because you didn't have a lot of money, so you bought a packet of 5. I think it was probably something like 15 cents or something like that. then you'd take them to school and you'd sell a couple to try and get your money back and smoke the other 3, and then you'd do the same the next day. So by the time I was about 14 or 15, I was well and truly addicted to smoking. At that time, of course, smoking was legal, which it is now, but it was cool, and everyone did it, and everyone got on the bus. And if anybody used to catch the bus in those times, the smell was, even if you were a smoker, the smell was disgusting. You got into a taxi, you'd smoke. You got into your workplace, people would smoke. Because it was cool, you got addicted early, and everybody did it. We've spent years trying to pull back from that, and to the point now where it's not cool to smoke. My wife the other day, when we were driving along, saw a woman driving her kids with a cigarette hanging out the car, and she was disgusted because it's not cool to smoke anymore. Unfortunately, there are people, and I'm not one of them, thank goodness, that don't smoke. They have taken the step, and I will say it is the single hardest thing I have ever did. I did it cold turkey when I was about 28, and I still remember, and I still would not, years later, ever try and have another cigarette because I'd be scared I'd get back on it. I suppose I have that addictive nature. So we're talking about something that's illegal, that's legal, but the worst thing back then, it was cool. Now, we're talking about vaping. Now, are we going to really allow the kids to carry on this trajectory that it's cool, and whether it be 50 metres from a school or not, if that delicatessen that sold those cigarettes to me had been 13 miles that way, and then I had to go to school, I'd have gone to the delicatessen to get the cigarette because I was hooked. So it doesn't matter whether it's within a precinct or not. Kids will travel, they will get it sometime. And are we really going to condone that? Because this motion, that's what it does. I understand that maybe not what the mover is trying to suggest, but in my view it's condoning vaping. And vaping contains who knows what. Cigarettes. Who knew what cigarettes contain? They spent years saying that it wasn't bad for you, and we know it is. We know it is. Vaping contains who knows what. But I predict that people that vape on a regular basis will have the same sort of impacts that people that smoked for a long period of time had. And so we will, as a society, be picking up the cost. If we allow this thing to get out of hand, we'll be picking up the cost as we have with regards to smoking. So I just can't believe that we're having this debate. And if we're suggesting that, I come from retail, so I know what retail is. It's about creating a market. And that's what these people selling vapes are trying to do. They're trying to create a market. They're trying to make it seem cool. They are trying to attract kids to it, so they get kids addicted to it, so that at some future point they will have a market, because their market of selling cigarettes is disappearing because of the good work that this society has done to try and make smoking not cool. Now, there are some people that are addicted to smoking and some people that might find vaping a less evil alternative. But there are ways at which they can do that. It may be hard, it may be difficult, but can I go back to that kid that I was back then? If I wanted something bad enough, I'd do anything to get it. Travel that 13 kilometres, or back then it was miles, and then back to school. So if you want it bad enough, you'll get it, if it's legal. So the people that need it can get it. Heaven help them. I hope they get off cigarettes altogether, because they will feel better for it. But I cannot believe that we are actually debating this motion. I have a lot of respect for the mover of the motion. He knows I have a lot of respect for him, but I will be voting against this motion, and I encourage everybody in the chamber, including the mover, to vote against it.
The question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Acting President, for a brief time to make a contribution on behalf of the operation in relation to the motion today. For new members in the chamber who weren't here in the last period of Parliament, This issue has been examined a couple of times by the Parliament of Western Australia, most recently in the last Parliament, in a select committee that was put together on a motion from the Honourable Aaron Stonehouse, of which I was a member on behalf of the opposition, and the Honourable Dr Sally Talbot was a member on behalf of the government, to recognise her contribution to that. Now, there's a raft of information that's available, and the Parliament can still provide you with the information that came out of that particular review. But there's been some confusion today around the legality of vaping devices as such. So if I could just reference the report, which was done, I think it must be at least 2 years ago now, perhaps into the third year, but I think is still relevant. So members, if you go to the select committee on that report, it does examine this question in detail. The regulation of e-cigarette devices under the Tobacco Products Control Act is a headline that starts on page 46. Now, 3.61 of the report says this: Section 106 of the TPCA, which is the Act, is also significant. It creates the offence of selling products that resemble tobacco products. And this comes under Section 106 of the Act. And 106 of the Act says this: a person must not sell any food, toy or product that is not a tobacco product but is A, designed to resemble a tobacco product or package. Now, the question mark was whether this particular Act therefore precluded the sale of e-cigarette devices, and it was actually tested. The Minister asked before whether this has been tested in the court, and it was tested in the court. So in 2016, if members want to read this, it's 3.63 in Chapter 3, obviously, of this report. It's on page 47. There was a case, and I'll just read this in so members are aware, and I know we don't have much time. The Court of Appeal of the Supreme Court ruled in 2016 that e-cigarette devices, whether or not they contain e-liquid with nicotine, fall within the definition of Section 106A of the Tobacco Products Control Act. So this was an appeal decision based on the successful prosecution of a small business in Perth that was selling e-cigarettes. The business owner appealed the decision to the Court of Appeal, basically based on whether that particular section of the Tobacco Control Act applied to e-cigarettes, and the Court of Appeal rejected his appeal. So it was tested in the Supreme Court, and found to be a valid interpretation of Section 106 of the Act, 106A. That was appealed, and the appeal was rejected, and that is the legislative basis for which e-cigarettes are illegal in the state of Western Australia. Now, that may have changed in a legal proceeding since, but I'm unaware of it if it has. And so I think members should just, that's the section, and I would commend to you the report done by that group of people. Not many of them are left in the Parliament, the contributors to the report, but there's a great deal of information, and it's a good example of how committees can actually achieve things. So that's the legal situation, as far as I'm aware, as currently exists. So Section 106A of the Tobacco Product Control Act prohibits tobacco-like products, and there was a Supreme Court case that was tested, and that Supreme Court case said that vaping e-cigarettes were captured under that section of the Act. There was a fine, significant fine given to a Perth business that was selling those products. They appealed to the appeals court, and the appeal court rejected that appeal. And that, as far as I'm aware, is the last testing of the legal basis. So the interpretation of 106A of the Tobacco Product Controls Act makes it illegal unless I'm unaware of a legal case that's happened in the last year.
No, that's our advice, that we're still operating on that 2016
case. Yep. So that's right. So
that we've just moved really post-COVID to now seriously looking at enforcement.
Yeah, okay. So, and look, I'm sure the mover of the motion is dealing with exactly the same question that the committee dealt with at the time. irrespective, accepting that it's illegal. And in fact, nicotine, and I think it's been mentioned that vaping liquids that contain nicotine are illegal unless by prescription. One of the issues is, of course, that...
no, it's actually not the vaping is illegal because if a pub
the
is
nicotine.
doing it. But it's the selling the product,
that's right.
not the consumer. There is no prohibition on the consumer.
No, so it's the retail, you can't sell, and that's why people are going on the internet to import things from America, etc. I do have concerns that there are products out there that you can be purchased which are more like lollies than they are like tobacco products. So you've got all these flavours coming in to be attractive, and there's no doubt that there's targeting of young people as a part of that. The committee that looked into this was well aware, and in fact was mentioned. I think Big Tobacco has been mentioned a couple of times. Big Tobacco was one of the contributors in terms of submissions to the committee, so they certainly had an interest in the process. But the question that you have to face ultimately, I think, boils down to this one. I think, and we heard evidence repeatedly that for some people, using e-cigarettes and vaping was an alternative to them smoking cigarettes. And I absolutely accept that. I think the Minister said the same thing. I absolutely accept that that's the case. So there are and I think the evidence shows that the damage from e-cigarettes is less than the damage from traditional cigarettes.
Well, just depending, part of the problem is that some of them, and I'm saying have loadings. The nicotine loadings are actually are incredibly high. So you still get the damage from the nicotine, if not from some of the other. Yeah, so and it's the damage from the other products from the cigarettes which are probably worse than the nicotine in many cases. So that becomes the issue. So if you can get your e-cigarette down to just nicotine and you remove all the tars and the cancer causes and all the rest of it. So I think on that basis, I think we concluded pretty convincingly that e-cigarettes are on average, and with perhaps some exceptions, but generally less damaging to human health than cigarettes. I agree with the members, though, who said that the ideal outcome is you don't have either. But the question is, how realistic is that? So I accept that there's a group of people, and I've spoken to people, and because I've actually, when I was on the committee, I would stop people in the street who are on these e-cigarettes and go, tell me about your story. You smoke e-cigarettes. Did you used to be a smoker? Do you think that it helps to get you off smoking cigarettes? Do you feel healthy because of that? It's absolutely the case that there are people. I was repeatedly told, I'd be a 2-pack a day person or a pack a day person if I wasn't doing this, then my health feels better. So I think that is exactly the case. And I think we have to acknowledge that some people get a genuine benefit in terms of getting off cigarettes. Having said that, so the benefits are established, but the risks are also high. And there is no doubt that the risks to young people in particular, the people who don't start on cigarettes but start on e-cigarettes, you can make a comment?
Yeah, I was just curious, do you know any statistics on people that didn't smoke and then took up vaping?
So we did get some statistics, and I'm sorry I don't have time to go through and pull it out. Have a look at the report.
Which year did you do the report?
Well, I think from memory 2016, but I may have to look at it and
18 or 19,
no, sorry, no, yeah, after 17, sorry, 18 or 19, somewhere there. In the first term of the Parliament, it's a select committee on personal choice, I think it was called.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was the one first.
It had bicycle helmets and a whole pile of things in, and we don't have time to talk about all of that. But it's worth looking at just for background. So so we did have data and we had presentations on the number of people who were taking up e-cigarettes specifically and smoked that before they had they tried cigarettes, and there's a group. So that is also a truth, that does occur. It is absolutely a truth that some people switch from cigarettes to e-cigarettes and have a health benefit. There are some people who take it up in e-cigarettes for obviously there's a health cost. Now, it's an immensely complex process. I think it behoves, and I think it was a pretty sensible debate, to be honest. I think we recognise both sides of the argument. I understand the move of the motion is intent on further expressing the need to look into this and see compare the benefits. If we could answer that question, we could ultimately fix the problem. But I think we're a fair bit away from that.
The Honourable Dr Brian Walker in reply.
Thank you, Acting President. And thank all here for a debate which I think needs to be had, and I do appreciate every comment here, every contribution. May I quickly reply to the Honourable Martin Pritchard? Thank you so much. I really valued what you said, because that is exactly what I feel as well. The smoking habit is awful, and I would do everything in my power to have no one smoking at all. 18% of the population currently smokes, 95% of prisoners currently smoke, which reflects an attitude of what choices do you make in life. And having children go behind the bike shed, as was the case when we were young, to try cigarettes, is something which is still a risk, especially when cigarettes are legally obtainable, whereas it's actually quite difficult to get a nicotine vape. So what I'm looking for here, and I'm calling for, can I reassure you, I'm not hoping here to encourage vaping for children. What I'm hoping here is that the government will take the request to investigate this closer, to get a more sensible approach which would allow smoking to come zero, and that we are not going to have this scourge upon us anymore. I would dearly hope for that. And vaping, I think, is a reasonable approach to doing that, and the science that I've presented this as paper today would, I think, underline that. I do hope this will be taken seriously, because if we don't, then what we are doing is we're opening up a black market, and a black market is certainly one good way of encouraging people to actually get less healthy and to then take up smoking, because they do get addicted to nicotine and they will then buy the legal cigarettes. So I would share that point of view entirely. I thank the Honourable Steve Thomas for his contribution. Much appreciated the research on that previous committee. I do take it to heart. Support here from Honourable Sophia Mormont, of course, because we are on the same pathway of trying to get the individual rights to do what you wish, but also looking for the wellness in society. I do appreciate that. The question we've got here, I think, with vaping is not so much is it good or bad. I think universally we can say vaping is not good. The question that the Honourable Stephen Pratt said, put out here was it's less bad. Yes, it's less bad. If you've got a choice between bad and less bad, I'm going to choose less bad. It makes common sense. Once we've got the less bad happy, then we can choose the better than the less bad. It's a matter of gradation here. And can we, by what we're currently doing in Western Australia, can we be encouraging more uptake of cigarette smoking despite all the efforts we're putting in? I think there's a serious risk of that. Because if we're making it difficult to get a nicotine vape, and we are, and it's easy to walk in and get some cigarettes, then people are going to do the easy thing more often. And we know this is not going to be a good idea. Now, the Honourable Cal McGowan interjected about how difficult is it to get nicotine. I prescribe nicotine as an app, as a liquid or as a vape. Not many people come for it because they can walk into the shop much easier. When I do, I've got to put an SASB application into the Department of Health, the TGA, and that needs to get approved. Then it needs to go to a chemist which will dispense that. It is doable, and every month they've got to come by and get another script. They've got to pay money for it. Okay, fine, you're paying for the vape, you're paying for the doctor, it's a cost thing. Okay, fine. It's a choice. It's actually quite onerous, yes.
But if you eliminate the black market sales and it was just prescription, what would happen? You would end up with an easier access because there'd be more volume and capacity in the system.
I thank you for that.
So you need to get rid of the black market setup.
No, there is the nub. That is exactly the point.
The ones that are selling it in the corner shop is
no,
what
it's not the black market, it's the internet.
But that's what I'm saying.
Now, the internet is actually very, very easily available. Now, I've had experience with this with my own boys with school as well. It's very easily obtained. Everyone does it, they're saying. And it's not being prescribed, it's not being got from the shops, it's being got from the internet and from friends selling it. When we try to prohibit, it's always the case. When we prohibit, we get more of the black market, more criminality, and this is absolutely not what we want. And so the request I have here, the intent of this motion, is not to say one side is right, one side is wrong. I'm, as said, rabidly anti-smoking, actually anti-nicotine must be said. But what I'm looking for here is for the government to take this on board and say, can we do this better? Is there a better way of doing this? And I hope that the Honourable Martin Pritchard would reverse that, to send this one as a recommendation to government to allow for more research. We're not asking for freeing things up. I'm asking here for research, for the government to actually take a closer look at this, look at what's happening internationally. Why are the other countries, the other major governments supporting vaping? Take New Zealand, take the UK, take America, for example. Why are they doing that and we're going the opposite way? Are we doing it better or are we doing it less well than other countries? That's a valid question to be asked as a sensible government caring for the wellness of our citizens, the ones we have sworn to defend. So with that, thanking all for the contributions, that we're all on the same page, that we all are going to support that what is good for our citizens here, then I thank for the very helpful debate from both sides and the extreme emotions from both sides, that we can talk about this in sensible tones, supporting each other in our differences and understandings. Thank you.